Church. Welcome to this week's message. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. It's an honor to be with you again this week as we continue in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah 7, verses 14 through 17, talking about the Immanuel Prophecy this week. And if you recall, I had put it off last week. It was going to be part of last week's message, but there's some things around the translation that presented some hurdles we had to get over, and was going to actually use a lot of the books to talk about directly from today, but because there's so much here to unpack, and so used a bunch of other books other than Matthew Henry and John Oswalt and another commentary by Cook, which is a general commentary on the Old Testament. So used a bunch of those things to get a better understanding of what we're actually talking about here, because it's not as straightforward as we all like to think it is. So, but we'll get to that in a minute. So last week we talked about how Ahaz was presented with this opportunity to ask God for a sign. And it was a sign that would have proved Ahaz wrong. He could have asked for anything he wanted, but it would have embarrassed him because he would have been proven wrong in his thinking that he could rely on Assyria. But Ahaz chooses Assyria over God, and he spurns this last chance. And as a result, even though he will not ask for a sign, God is now going to bring one, because there is judgment and consequences for Judah's disobedience, and it's going to be suffered by everyone. If you go back to 2 Kings 16, 7 and 8, it says, "So Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am your servant and your son. Come up and rescue me from the hand of the king of Syria and from the hand of the king of Israel, who are attacking me." Ahaz also took the silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent a present to the king of Assyria. So Ahaz has made his choice. But even though, again, that he will not ask for a sign, God's going to give him one. And while it's a promise, it is also a threat of what's coming, a foretelling of what is coming. So we will read all of the verses in today, and then we'll talk about everything. So we begin in verse 14. "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and call his name Immanuel. He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the boy knows how to refuse evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted. The Lord will bring upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house such days as have not come since the day of Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria." So the word virgin is where we find the hurdle today, because the word that Isaiah chose here is the word Alma. It does not translate directly into the English word virgin. It means a girl, a woman of marriageable age, or an unmarried woman or maiden. The word for virgin, were he trying to emphasize that, is Bethulah, B-E-B space T-U-L-A. Hopefully I remember to put it on the bottom of the screen. I keep saying I'm going to put these things like the email address and stuff on the bottom of the screen, and then when I go to edit, I always forget. So if not, you can look it up. Blue Leather Bible is a great resource, and you can see that he uses the word Alma there. So Oswalt got really convoluted in discussing this whole thing as to why and what. And I don't know that in and of itself is really important, because I believe that where this lands is that when you look at society back in the days of Isaiah, an unmarried woman was assumed to be a virgin. She was assumed to be pure from a sexual standpoint. And so I think that's why it really probably didn't matter what word he used in this sense, because it was presumed that a woman who was not married would be a virgin. And so Alma then suits this. And so there are but because of the timing of this as well, that this prophecy is presented here in this timeline, here in the timeline, there are three views of this. It's not just this straight up view of the coming Messiah. The first interpretation of this is that a child will be conceived shortly after this prophecy is given. It would be a woman who marries, probably a young girl. Back then, and in the case of Mary, the mother of Jesus, a betrothed girl was seen of age somewhere between the ages of 12 and 15. Doesn't mean she got married right away, but that seemed an acceptable age to be betrothed. And so whoever this girl was, it would be assumed that when she married, she was a virgin. She would then have a baby by the regular means. And before he would know good and evil, this alliance between Syria and Israel would be destroyed. It would be put down. And in this interpretation, some think then, again, because of the timing of this, that this child was Isaiah's second son, Mahir Shalal Hashbaz. And it's a son that's talked about soon after this in chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. Now, the issues with this is that Isaiah's wife already bore a son, Shir Jashub. We talked about him either last week or the week before. So she's not a virgin at this point. And his son is not named Immanuel. So that interpretation really doesn't fly. The second interpretation of this is that it's purely a messianic prophecy and that the virgin is Mary, obviously. But if this is true, then how does this then apply to what's going on with this alliance between Syria and Israel? Since the prophecy doesn't come true of Immanuel until Jesus is born, some 500 years later. What does this have to do with, Jesus and his birth and eating of curds and honey? And how does it relate to the destruction of alliance? Because, this destruction of the alliance then would happen way before Jesus is born. And so the last view is one that interprets this, as many prophecies, as one that applies to the timeline then, and then later with the coming of the Messiah. There would be a girl in this time that was a virgin, and that would get pregnant and have a child. The boy would still be young during this alliance of Syria and Israel. And this sign, this prophecy, would have to have some significance in the historical timeline, right? With this situation that's facing Ahaz and Judah. And so with this promise then of the coming Messiah, what this prophecy then entails is that there will be a birth of a boy, and before he knows good from evil, this alliance between Syria and Israel will be broken, and it will remind the nation that God has not totally abandoned them. But it would designate a specific time, right? This kind of 2 to 3 years. If you factor in pregnancy of 9 months and until the boy is old enough, there's this time period, 2 to 3, 4 to 5 years, somewhere in there. And then when you look at history, this all fits, because this alliance was broken in 732 BC when Tiglath-Pileser destroys Damascus, and he puts Rezin to death. And then it's after this that Ahaz goes to Damascus. He sees the altar that we talked about last week. He has sketches of it drawn up and sent back and installed in the temple at Jerusalem. So Ahaz is going to see all this, and God knows this. And so it's no wonder that Isaiah and God are angry with him, because he refuses to see what's happening here. And even after, and I apologize for the planes today, it sounds like they changed the flight pattern to fly directly over us today as we decided to do this. Even after this pact is dissolved and these two leaders are dealt with, Ahaz still refuses to turn away from Assyria. And this is now the last part of this prophecy today, the last chapter, or the last verse, about Assyria being used to bring trouble upon Judah, comes into play. Now, again, we have to remember that God has a purpose for Israel. And it is a purpose for good. God has not abandoned her. His mercy will still be shown. There will be a remnant that will remain. And so Israel will not be forsaken. Messiah is coming. Immanuel is coming. He's coming through Israel. And because of that and the covenant God made with her, her future is secure. Messiah will be of a divine nature. He will be extraordinary. He will not be conceived of natural means. He will be conceived of spiritual means. And he will be holy. And he will be worthy of the throne of David. And as I said earlier, that coming of the Messiah is going to happen some 500 years down the road from this time. And that's why this prophecy has to have some meaning in the timeline in the days of Ahaz. But God is not done with Israel. And he said this back in Genesis 49:10. He says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. When he was talking about the differences of the blessings bestowed upon the different tribes. And he continued, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. So God is with them. God has made a covenant with them, and God will be at peace with them eventually. I want to read from Matthew Henry's commentary, just because, again, it's one of those things where I can't put it into my own words any better than the way he says. And in talking about the both sides of the coin of this prophecy, the application now and then the application with the coming of the Messiah, this is what he says. He says, now this was a further sign of God's favor to the house of David and the tribe of Judah. For he that intended to work this great salvation among them, no doubt would work out for them all those other salvations which were to be the types and figures of this, as it were preludes to this. Again, you have the sacrificial system. You have the daily sacrifice for the sins of the people. You have the Passover. You have all these things in the Old Testament that point to Jesus. You have the number of times that Israel sins and turns back and is forgiven. All the kings that turn against God. And then you have this king that rises up that is for God and finds the book of the law and reads the book of the law, and the people repent and they fast and they turn back to God. Those are the other salvations that all point to Christ that Matthew Henry is talking about. He says, here is a sign for you, not in the depth nor in the height, but in the prophecy, in the promise, in the covenant made with David, which you are no strangers to. The promised seed shall be Immanuel, God with us. Let that word comfort you, that God is with us, and that your land is Immanuel's land. Let not the heart of the house of David be moved thus, nor let Judah fear setting up the son of Tabeel. For nothing can cut off the entail on the son of David that shall be Immanuel. So while Israel will suffer chastisement for her sins, she's not abandoned. We've been saying this for a while now. All that is coming upon them is not a sign of God's turning his back on Israel, but a sign of God's desire for her repentance and return to a right relationship with him. So this coming Jesus, this coming Immanuel, will be like any other child. He will grow up like any other child. He will be nursed and fed and taught like all the other children around him. And he will progress like any other normal child through infancy, through childhood, through his teenage years. And he will eventually grow to become a man, and he will grow in knowledge and wisdom. I believe he's going to go to Torah school or Hebrew school or whatever classes Israel boys and young men went to. He will grow in his knowledge, and he will mature, and he will grow strong in the Spirit. He will choose to serve God and to obey God and to be submissive to the will of God. And he will refuse the evil and choose the good. Remember the tempting in the wilderness after he's baptized. Luke 2 talks about this. Luke says this in chapter 2, verse 40. He says, "And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him." And again in chapter 52, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man." So while, and all this applies to us as well, right? We may be in a bad stretch, right? As a people, in our marriage, in family life, in our job, as a nation. But regardless of Israel's sin, the kindness of God will not be fully taken away from them. And the love of God is not taken away from us. He will continue to show favor to Israel because of his covenant with David. But the chastening is coming for the sins of the nation. Ahaz himself is going to suffer through it. The people and the nation and the house of David are going to have to suffer through this. It's going to be unprecedented. It's going to be unlike anything that the nation has seen since the nation split. And Ephraim and the 9 other tribes split and left Judah and became the northern kingdom of Israel. Israel's been living in her sin a long time. You go back through the Old Testament, and we're going to, I think what we're going to do next year is as we went through the New Testament this year in a year, we're going to go through the Old Testament next year in a year to come to a better understanding of this. Because not only is this Israel's history, our spiritual history is wrapped up in this as well. Because Israel has been living in sin up to this point a long time. You've seen, as I said earlier, kings come and go out of favor, in and out of favor with God because of their belief and who they would worship. And the thing is, the longer that people continue in their sin, the harsher the punishment and the chastening they can expect. Because we get entrenched. It's like an addiction. It's a habit. I've told this story before in counseling. The counselor used to tell me, you dig these grooves, and if they're wrong grooves, you got to dig new ones. You got to form new ones. But the cool thing is, as you dig new paths, you cover up the old wrong paths with the dirt and you fill those in. And so the more we get entrenched in sin, sometimes the harder it is to come out of it, and hence the harsher the consequences. And so for Ahaz and for Judah, God is going to make Assyria, the one that Ahaz is relying on, who is Ahaz's false sense of security. Assyria is now going to be the instrument of their destruction. And so, the application for us today is, who do we put our faith in? What do we put our faith in? Because what awaits Judah is the sound and consequences of war. That's what's coming. Because whatever else we put our trust in besides God will one day turn and become our master. And so we have to really look at, what do we put our faith in? What do we rely on? What do we find our security in? Because if it's anything else other than God, it's going to turn around and bite us in the butt, to be blunt, eventually. And so we have to be all in with God and be listening for his voice, and to be praying and to be allowing him to guide us, because it is only his plan that matters. And it's only his plan that we can fully put our trust in.